He built one of the most watched firearms channels in YouTube history, nearly 1 billion views, 7 million subscribers, and an audience that grew faster than almost anything else on the platform in the early 2010s. Then a man was murdered. Then federal agents with guns raided his property. Then his entire firearms collection, every weapon that made the channel possible, was seized, destroyed, and never returned. And today, this man is legally prohibited from ever picking up a firearm again for the rest of his life. That man is Kyle Myers, better known to the internet as FPSRussia, a Georgian car dealership worker who invented a fake Russian gunman named Dimitri Potapoff and accidentally built one of YouTube's first breakout channels around it. By the time it was over, the story had gone from a one-man comedy act filmed on a family farm to a federal felony conviction, an unsolved murder, and a frozen channel that still sits at 6.9 million subscribers today, years after the last video was posted. Stay with this one, because the ending is not what you think it is, and the part most people never heard is the part that actually explains everything. Kyle Myers was born in 1986 in Hart County, Georgia, a part of the state where deer hunting is a childhood rite of passage, not a hobby. His father owned firearms. Myers himself fired his first gun around the age of 5 or 6. By the time YouTube existed, he was already familiar with weapons in the way that kids from rural Georgia often are. Not as spectacle, but as ordinary household objects. His first YouTube presence had nothing to do with guns. Starting around 2006, Myers ran a gaming channel under the handle KLM5986, filming himself playing Call of Duty with commentary. It wasn't built for fame. It was the kind of low-budget, low-stakes gaming content that filled early YouTube, and it reflected exactly the kind of person Myers was at the time. A young man from Georgia who liked video games, liked guns, and had no particular plan to connect the two. That changed at a car dealership. Myers was working there when he encountered a Russian coworker whose accent caught his attention. He started imitating it, not mockingly, but in the way that someone with a natural ear for voices picks up a sound and can't let it go. Combined with a lifelong interest in real-world firearms and a growing frustration that Call of Duty weapons looked and behaved nothing like their real-life counterparts, something clicked. He would create a character, a Russian gun expert, a man named Dimitri Potapoff, a professional Russian from Moscow who had access to weapons that most Americans had only ever seen on a screen. The character was entirely fictional, the guns were real, and the combination turned out to be something nobody on YouTube had seen before. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. The FPSRussia channel launched on April 19, 2010. Myers filmed on his family's farm in Franklin County, using land his father owned, and firearms sourced through early connections in Georgia's tight-knit firearms community. The format was simple and repeatable. Dimitri, in his thick, absurdly committed fake accent, would introduce the weapon of the day, explain its characteristics with comic authority, and then demonstrate it on whatever target happened to be available. Justin Bieber posters in the early videos. Fruit, plastic bottles, mannequins painted as zombies. The targets were irrelevant. The character and the weapons were the whole point. YouTube had nothing like it. Most firearms content at the time was either purely educational or purely recreational. FPSRussia was neither. It was entertainment wrapped around real weaponry, hosted by a man who clearly knew exactly what he was doing even while playing someone he wasn't. The accents were bad in the best possible way. The guns were extraordinary, and the audience came in waves. By June 2011, just over a year after launch, the channel crossed 1 million subscribers. At its peak, FPSRussia sat inside YouTube's top 10 most subscribed channels on the entire platform. The channel would eventually accumulate over 970 million views across just 114 videos. To put that in perspective, that's nearly 1 billion views with fewer videos than most mid-tier creators post in a single year. The financial picture reflected the scale. Estimates based on ad revenue tracking across the channel's lifespan placed total earnings somewhere in the range of $1.8 million from YouTube monetization alone, and that doesn't include merchandise revenue or the Patreon and sponsorship income that followed. None of that would have been possible without Keith Ratliff. Most people who know this story stop here, but the real story starts right now. Keith Ratliff was not on camera. Most FPSRussia viewers in 2010, 2011, or 2012 had no idea he existed. But without him, the channel that made Myers famous almost certainly couldn't have operated at the level it did. Ratliff was a firearms specialist. He co-owned FPS Industries, a custom firearms fabrication and testing company based in Carnesville, Georgia. He held the licenses and maintained the industry connections that allowed Myers to access weapons that weren't available through typical retail channels. The anti-aircraft cannon, the .50 caliber Browning machine gun, the armored personnel carrier that appeared in one of the channel's most watched videos. Ratliff is the reason those weapons ended up in front of a camera on a Georgia farm rather than in a military warehouse. He was also the person who sourced tannerite, a binary explosive compound legal to purchase but requiring careful handling, which featured in some of the channel's most visually dramatic moments. In February 2012, Ratliff relocated from Kentucky to Carnesville, Georgia, setting up his operation near Myers' filming locations. He lived in an apartment connected to the FPS Industries warehouse. He had told his sister he was building something serious. He had spoken to her on the phone on Christmas Eve 2012, the last holiday before everything changed. On January 3, 2013, an FPS Industries employee arrived at the Carnesville warehouse and found Keith Ratliff dead. He had been shot once in the head. There were no signs of a struggle. Surveillance equipment had been removed from the premises. Several firearms were missing. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation opened a homicide case. The case has never been solved. What happened next is the reason this story spread across the internet. The FPSRussia channel went quiet in the immediate aftermath of Ratliff's death. Myers publicly stated he was cooperating with investigators and had no information about what had happened. The GBI confirmed they believed the identity of the killer, or killers, was known to people within Ratliff's circle, which put those individuals, in the GBI's words, at a continued risk of harm. Nobody was charged, nobody was arrested. The case went cold in a way that left the community that had built up around FPSRussia with no resolution and no explanation. 2 months later, federal attention arrived at Myers' door in a different form entirely. On March 29, 2013, more than 40 Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives agents descended on Myers' Franklin County residence and his father's nearby farm, a location frequently used as a filming backdrop for FPSRussia content. The stated justification from the ATF spokesman was that Myers had been using explosives and getting paid for it via YouTube. Technically accurate, but as multiple legal observers noted at the time, being paid by a platform for content involving commercially obtained explosive compounds was not, on its face, illegal. No charges were filed following the 2013 raid. No arrests were made. Nothing illegal was seized from the property. The raid nonetheless damaged the channel's momentum significantly. Myers halted production for 9 months. When FPSRussia finally returned in January 2014, it was a different operation. Quieter, more careful, missing the creative energy that Ratliff's involvement had helped fuel. But Kyle Myers kept going. Here's what the comments kept asking. And here's the answer they never got. Until now, the version of FPSRussia that returned in 2014 retained its audience. The subscriber count held, views continued to accumulate, but something had shifted beneath the surface. The channel that had once fired anti-aircraft weapons and drove armored personnel carriers was operating with a quieter inventory and a noticeably reduced scope. Myers continued uploading through 2014 and 2015, posting new content and maintaining the Dimitri persona, but the uploads grew less frequent. The extraordinary access to heavy weaponry that had defined the early channel, the access that Ratliff had made possible, was gone, and no equivalent replacement had emerged. On April 16, 2016, Kyle Myers uploaded what would turn out to be the final FPSRussia video. It was a side-by-side comparison of 2 commercial flamethrowers. It received over 3 million views. In the video, Myers gave no indication it would be the last one. No farewell, no sign-off. The channel simply went silent after that date, and it has never posted again. At the time, most observers assumed the silence was temporary. Channels go on hiatus. Creators take breaks. The FPSRussia community waited for a return announcement that never came. What happened in 2017 is why it never did. On August 7, 2017, more than a year after the final FPSRussia video, Kyle Myers was arrested by the Franklin County Sheriff's Office and the Appalachian Regional Drug Enforcement Office. He had received approximately 25 grams of butane honey oil through the United States Postal Service to a post office box in Georgia. Butane honey oil is a concentrated marijuana extract, and at the time it was classified as a Schedule I controlled substance in the state. The arrest itself was serious. The charges were more so: felony possession of a Schedule I substance with intent to distribute, and possession of drug-related objects. Following the arrest, the ATF and Franklin County authorities executed a search warrant on Myers' Carnesville property. They found no weapons violations, but they found the butane honey oil, and because federal law prohibits the possession of firearms by individuals suspected of illegal drug use, the ATF seized more than 50 firearms from the property. Myers was charged. He contested aspects of the prosecution over the following 2 years. On June 19, 2019, he accepted a plea agreement. He was sentenced to 2 years of probation, a fine, and 56 days at Federal Correctional Institution, Talladega, a minimum security federal facility in Alabama. He served the time, he completed the probation, but a federal conviction for drug distribution carries a consequence that doesn't end when the sentence does. As a convicted felon, Kyle Myers permanently lost his constitutional right to own a firearm. The firearms seized during the 2017 raid, a collection reportedly valued at $400,000, were confiscated by federal authorities and subsequently destroyed. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me because this next part is why the whole story matters. The FPSRussia channel did not disappear. It is still live. As of April 2025, it holds 6.9 million subscribers and has accumulated over 970 million total views. Millions of people have subscribed to a channel that has not published new content in nearly a decade. The videos still play. The comments still accumulate. Dimitri Potapoff is still there in the thumbnails, holding weapons that his creator can no longer legally possess. Kyle Myers himself did not disappear either. He returned to the Painkiller Already podcast, a show he co-founded back in 2010, the same year FPSRussia launched. PKA, as it's known, has continued running weekly episodes through 2024 and into 2025, with Myers, Woody's Gamertag, and a host called Mirka Durka covering pop culture, gaming, and their personal lives. Myers has spoken openly on the podcast about the FPSRussia shutdown, the legal process he went through, and his life after the conviction. The fitness journey Myers went through during his post-channel years has been a recurring topic on PKA, documented on the podcast in ways that suggest someone who rebuilt himself physically after years of disruption and legal pressure. He has spoken candidly about the experience in ways that many fans found more relatable than anything Dimitri Potapoff ever said. In October 2024, it was reported that Myers declined an opportunity to stream on Twitch. The rationale, according to reports, was a desire for privacy and a reluctance to re-engage publicly with the conversations about his past that any return to streaming would inevitably trigger. He remains a podcaster by choice, not a platform personality. The question his community keeps returning to, on Reddit, in forums, across gun enthusiast spaces, is whether FPSRussia could ever come back. But here's the part that changes everything about what you just heard. In January 2025, a petition circulated on the Firearms subreddit, calling for a presidential pardon for Kyle Myers. The argument was specific. A non-violent drug offense had permanently stripped him of his Second Amendment rights, and a pardon would restore those rights and potentially allow an FPSRussia revival. The petition gained traction in firearms communities and gaming forums. Similar conversations had been happening since at least 2023, when PKA co-host Taylor Mirka publicly called for Myers' pardon, citing the dropped federal gun charges against Hunter Biden as a precedent for equal legal treatment. The pardon push reflects something real about how the FPSRussia community still thinks about the channel. They do not see it as over. They see it as suspended, a consequence of legal circumstances rather than a deliberate ending. But there is a harder reality underneath the nostalgia. Keith Ratliff's murder has never been solved. The GBI has not made an arrest in over 12 years. The firearms infrastructure Ratliff provided, the licenses, the connections, the physical access to weapons that created the channel's most iconic moments, cannot be replicated through a pardon alone. The $400,000 in confiscated firearms is gone. The manufacturing relationships and federal licenses Ratliff brought to the partnership do not exist in the same form. And Myers himself, in his public statements on PKA, has not announced any plans to revive the channel under any circumstances. As of early 2026, no pardon has been issued. No application has been confirmed. The channel remains frozen at 970 million views. The story of FPSRussia did not end with a dramatic final video or a tearful goodbye. It ended with a mail package, a drug conviction, and a federal agency destroying a weapons collection that had made nearly 1 billion people watch a Georgia man pretend to be Russian for 6 years. What FPSRussia built between 2010 and 2016 was genuinely unprecedented. A character-driven firearms entertainment channel that cracked YouTube's top 10 through nothing more than a fake accent, a family farm, and a creative instinct nobody else had thought to act on. The fact that it ended the way it did, not through declining views, not through creative burnout, but through a murder, 3 federal investigations, and a drug conviction, makes it one of the stranger career stories in the history of online media. Kyle Myers is still out there. He is podcasting, living in Georgia, and by all appearances building a quieter version of a life that the internet years made impossible. Whether FPSRussia ever returns depends on legal circumstances and personal decisions that are entirely his to make. But here is the question worth sitting with. The channel hit 970 million views and never got to 1 billion. Do you think Kyle Myers deserves a pardon that could let him finish what he started? Or was the conviction a fair consequence that should stand, regardless of what it cost the channel?